I thought it might be fun to show off a few 1970s men's adventure paperbacks that use a Canadian setting. And these are not written by Canadian authors. And as a Canadian myself, I'm not here to judge them on their representation of Canada or relate them in any way to any current affairs. That's not what this video is about. And in fact, there's not much Canadian content to remark on, except for a recurring theme of Quebec separatism. And these books were written shortly after a moment in Canadian history called the October Crisis of 1970, which is something you can look up on your own. But basically, by the late 60s, Quebec nationalists were becoming violent, and there was a lot of homegrown terrorism and bombings, and it reached a bit of a climax in 1970 with the kidnapping of a British diplomat and the kidnapping and execution of the Quebec Labour Minister. And Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau had to roll out the military. And it's called the October Crisis. And these books wanted to exploit the current civil unrest in Quebec and send in their pulp heroes to lend a hand. Like in this classic, The Canadian Crisis, a title very similar to the October Crisis. And this is The Executioner number 24, published by Pinnacle in 1975. And in it, Quebec is unstable and in turmoil, and hostile separatists run amok. Meanwhile, all the kingpins and godfathers of all the different mafia families are having a conference in a hotel in Montreal, and they're plotting to join forces and form one big syndicate and help the separatists take over and make Quebec the mob's home base and a sort of hotbed of criminal activity. And Mac Bolan is out to stop it. And in this book, you get Mac Bolan literally in the walls of this hotel where the conference is being held. And it's an old hotel that's been newly renovated. And there's a space between the new interior walls and the original stone. And the space between is lined with scaffolding and ladders, enabling Mac Bolan to sneak around and pop out of the wall paneling and execute. Maybe it's not the strongest entry in the series, but it's a classic. And this next one is a special kind of awful. This is The Canadian Bomber Contract by Philip Atlee, a Joe Gull mystery from 1971, published by Fawcett Gold Medal. And look at that cover. It looks like the merry pranksters being airlifted over the Rainbow Bridge. And in this one, Quebec separatists and American terrorists have a diabolical plot to blow up Niagara Falls, and Joe Gull is out to stop them. And I like this one because of its setting. I was born and raised in the Niagara region, so I'm familiar with the area and the landmarks and the routes they're taking. But anytime I've been to Montreal, I've taken the train. But when they're driving the bomb from Toronto to Niagara Falls, I'm very familiar with that trip. And I know all the little towns that they're passing through. And they smuggle the bomb through the city of St. Catharines. And I actually bought this book at a bookstore in St. Catharines. So shout out to the right bookshop. So that's cool, but when Joe Gull is driving through the Niagara Fruit Belt, he's commenting on how nice the vineyards look, but he says that he can't fully enjoy the picturesque beauty of it because, he says, everybody knows that Canadian wines are the worst. And he even goes as far as to speculate that it's due to the climate and compares Niagara to France, which is funny because a quick Google search will show you that Niagara's wine country and the fruit belt have a very similar climate to Bordeaux and Burgundy, both in France. And he has nothing nice to say about the Canadian side of Niagara Falls either, saying that it has a sleazy carnival atmosphere, which is true with all its wax museums and haunted houses and tourist shops. You kind of hit the nail on the head with that description. But still, a lot of trash talk in this one, which is a strange approach. But moving on, next we have number 6 in the Iceman series, titled Canadian Kill by Joseph Nazel, and published in 1974 by Holloway House, who were most known for publishing Black experience novels post-civil rights movement. And Iceman was an African-American pulp hero from the 70s, and he rose from the streets of Harlem to now own and operate and live in his own adult pleasure palace called the Oasis that caters to important rich men. And we won't dwell on that, but we do start the story off here. And Iceman is stressed. He's very politically in tune and keeps up with the news, mostly as a way of keeping tabs on all the important men he deals with, and so he knows who to cancel. But the news is all bad, and Iceman is stressed. So his 4 closest comrades and himself, 3 girls and another guy, who are all trained in the martial arts, by the way, decide to take a vacation to try and get away from all the bad news. So they start thinking, where can we go that is so completely out of touch with the rest of the world that we can truly escape it all? And as you already know, they pick Canada, where apparently Iceman has a luxury cottage way up in northern Quebec somewhere in the mountains. But there's no Quebec separatism in this one. Instead, upon arriving at their cottage, they intercept and rescue a young French-Canadian girl who's fleeing a eugenics cult called the Next Dimension of Man, with vital information that she's taking to the authorities to expose them. And she's an ex-member. And the NDM are going to fight to get her and their secrets back from Iceman and his crew. And it has its gunfights, but it also has enough unarmed hand-to-hand combat with kung fu sound effects to give it a kung fu hashtag, I think. And Iceman wins, and the girl goes back with them to live at the Oasis. And speaking of Iceman winning, there's a really good chapter on Joseph Nazel and the Iceman series in this book, Pimping Fictions, African-American Crime Literature and the Untold Story of Black Pulp Publishing by Justin Gifford. And this is an academic deep dive into the subject. And Justin Gifford is assistant professor of English at the University of Nevada, and according to his website, teaches African American and U.S. American literature and cultural studies and mass market fiction. And there's a big section in here on Holloway House and how guys like Donald Goines were writing about a pretty grim Black experience, and then Joseph Nazel came along and started writing escapism and stories with a positive outcome where the Black man wins. And he compares Iceman to Donald Goines' Kenyatta series, which I haven't read in total, but I know what it's all about because Justin Gifford examines it. And it's not happy like Iceman. It's much darker in political tone. And this book, too, has a really well-researched chapter on Donald Goines, where he interviews relatives and editors from Holloway House who actually worked with Goines. And there's some information in here about Goines' mysterious case that I haven't heard anybody talk about anywhere else or in any of the mini documentaries that I've seen on YouTube about him. And I'd love to tell you about it, but this video is about men's adventure paperbacks from the 70s with Canadian in their titles. And I just wanted to show these off as a funny niche. And I love the presentation of these with a little picture of the hero in the title. Very pulpy. And if you know of any other men's adventure books set in Canada, let me know in the comments. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Over and out.